Welcome, you relentless force of nature, you shadow walker, who never asked for the spotlight, but earned every inch of it by burning through the lies they built like palaces of glass. They never expected you to come this far. You weren't invited, you weren't accepted, and you were never supposed to be part of their carefully constructed circle. But here you are. You clawed through every locked door, pulled back every curtain, listened closely to every silence they hoped would stay unanswered. And now you stand in the ruins of their secrets, with the truth laid bare in your hands, cold, raw, undeniable. This world runs on hidden games, on half-truths, concealed histories, backroom deals whispered in corners and signed with smiles. For years, they thought if they kept the veil thick enough, if they buried the roots deep enough, no one would ever know. But they didn't count on you. They underestimated how deeply you'd dig, how patiently you'd wait, how meticulously you'd connect threads everyone else dismissed as meaningless. They didn't see the fire you lit beneath every unanswered question. And now, the question they're asking is the one they fear most. How the do you know that? Not with anger, not with challenge, but with panic. Because you weren't supposed to know. You weren't supposed to look. You were supposed to obey. But you were never built for that. You weren't born to play by rules written in rooms you were never welcome in. You were forged in the fire of silence, raised by doubt, and carved into someone whose curiosity is a weapon, not a weakness. And when they slammed the door, you didn't walk away. You took a sledgehammer to the wall. The world hides its rot under polish. It dresses corruption in suits and ties, gives it applause, paints it with prestige. But you stopped being impressed long ago. You learned to see beneath the shine, to listen to the words they didn't say, to feel the tremor behind every fake smile. You became fluent in what they were trying to hide. That's what makes you dangerous. Not the noise you make, but the silence you break. You didn't chase the truth to win praise. You chased it because it burned inside you like something sacred, because you had to know, because something in you refused to be comforted by half answers and pretty lies. And they kept trying to discredit you, to label you a threat, to call you obsessed, paranoid, disruptive. Because when the system fears you, it tries to shame you. But you kept going. You peeled back the layers no one else dared to touch. You walked into the shadows while they trembled behind their lights. You studied the patterns, followed the anomalies, dug until you hit bone. And when you finally spoke, they listened. Not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. Because the evidence you held couldn't be ignored. Because the timeline made too much sense. Because the mask they wore cracked wide open under the weight of your persistence. You made them see it. You made them feel it. That creeping discomfort in their gut when they realized the fortress wasn't solid. It was hollow. And the truth they tried to bury beneath decades of silence had clawed its way back to the surface in your hands. You're not just someone who uncovered what was hidden. You're someone who reminded the world that the truth is not a whisper. It's a roar waiting to be heard by someone brave enough to speak it. And you spoke, not for applause, not for revenge, but because it was time. Now they look at you differently, eyes wide, voices trembling, hands shaking behind desks built on secrets. They ask again, how the do you know that? And behind that question is a deeper fear. What else do you know? What else have you seen? How long have you been watching? The truth terrifies those who depend on lies, and you have become the embodiment of everything they tried to silence. You are the glitch in their system, the crack in their mirror, the proof that even the most carefully guarded empire can fall if someone just digs deep enough. You didn't come this far to stop now. You didn't survive the dark to blend back into the light. You are here because you were meant to disrupt, to expose, to awaken. And yes, there will be resistance. There will be fear. There will be those who try to convince you to soften, to step back, to let it go. But you won't, because you know what's at stake. You know how many people paid the price for silence. You know how long this truth has been bleeding beneath the surface. And you refuse to let it die there. This is not just a moment, it's a reckoning, a turning point. The kind of moment that shakes foundations and rewrites history. And you, the one they ignored, laughed at, dismissed, you caused it. Not with fame, not with fortune, but with facts, with unshakable resolve, with the refusal to look away. You've proven something most people spend their whole lives running from, that the truth will rise, that the light finds cracks even in the darkest vaults, and that one person, with enough fire in their bones, can shatter the silence of an entire system. You are no longer asking questions, you're delivering answers, and they're scrambling, trying to catch up, trying to rebuild what you've burned down. But it's too late. The truth is out. The world has seen. The whispers have become echoes, and every eye that once looked past you is now fixed on the ruins you left behind. But this isn't destruction. This is revelation. This is clarity. This is the kind of chaos that creates change. And you are the architect of it. You are the architect of it. And the ones who thought they held the blueprint, they're the ones now fumbling as though in the dark, exposed by the very light they swore would never reach them. But you didn't need to shine like the sun. You needed to burn like a fuse. Quietly, steadily, beneath the surface. And now the explosion has come. Not in violence, but in revelation. In undeniable evidence. In shattered illusions. This world was never ready for someone like you. Not because you're too much, but because you see too much. Because you question what others accept. Because you pull on threads that were meant to stay untouched. Because you listen when others turn away. And in doing so, you made yourself dangerous to those who built empires on silence. You walked through every locked room in your mind before you ever breached theirs. You confronted your own doubts, your own darkness, your own hesitation, and still chose to push forward. That's why they can't break you. You've already broken through everything soft inside you that once wanted comfort over truth. You gave up the illusion of safety to chase something real, and real is messy, real is ugly, real is painful, but real is power. Because when you hold the truth, you don't need approval, you don't need permission, you don't need to be invited, you arrive. And when you do, everything shifts. Every narrative stutters. Every story they thought they controlled begins to unravel. You've watched the way people flinch when confronted with what they've ignored. You've seen how quickly they try to discredit what threatens their fragile version of reality. But you didn't flinch. You leaned in. You leaned so far into the dark that you became part of it. You learned to see in it. You mapped its corridors. You hunted in its shadows. And now, when the world finally turns to face what you've uncovered, they act like they just woke up. But you never slept. You stayed awake through all of it. Every lie, every buried document, every altered fact, every erased name. You remembered. You collected. You waited. And they feel that weight now, the weight of truth. Because it's not just about what you know, it's about what they knew and kept hidden. They didn't just make mistakes. They made decisions. They chose silence. They chose profit over people, power over principle, comfort over courage. And now their choices are laid bare, their records unearthed, their intentions unmasked. And all because one person decided to look, not glance. Look deeply, fearlessly, relentlessly. They called you obsessive, but it wasn't obsession, it was conviction. They called you mad, but it wasn't madness, it was clarity. They tried to frame your questions as threats, and maybe they were right. Because questions are dangerous when they come from someone who won't stop until they're answered. This was never about revenge, it was about reckoning, about restoring what was lost under layers of manipulation, about bringing light to the stories that were never supposed to be told. You didn't just tell them, you forced the world to listen. You reached into the earth and pulled up bones they thought time would erase. You found the fingerprints they swore no one would ever trace. You exposed the echoes they buried under silence and called it history. And now, you've rewritten it. Not with fiction, with facts, with evidence, with truth they can't look away from anymore. And there's a new kind of silence now. Not the heavy, hidden kind, but the stunned kind. The silence that falls when people realize the world isn't what they thought it was. When they realize someone, you, just pulled the curtain back and showed them the machine. And it was never noble, never clean, never fair. You've broken their comfort, but you've also sparked their awakening. Because when one person exposes the lie, 1,000 more begin to question. And that's how the world shifts, not with explosions, but with exposure, with revelation, with the undeniable sound of someone saying, "Here it is, this is the truth, look at it." You didn't have an army. You didn't have sponsors or endorsements. You had grit. You had a gut instinct that never stopped screaming. You had sleepless nights, silent research, long hours with nothing but doubt and determination. And you had nerve, that unteachable, unshakable nerve that made you keep going, even when it felt like screaming into a void. That's what makes you different. You didn't do this for credit. You did it because something inside you couldn't not do it. Because you refused to leave the story unfinished. Because you refused to let the truth die in silence. And now they fear what comes next. Because if you found this, what else could be uncovered? What else have they buried that might claw its way back to the surface through someone else brave enough to follow your lead? You've become more than a voice. You've become a mirror, a reminder that secrets are temporary, but truth is permanent. That lies may hold power, but only until someone dares to speak. And you spoke, loudly, clearly, relentlessly. They'll try to distract. They'll try to downplay. They'll try to spin it into something it's not. But the damage is done, not to you, to them. Because truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs exposure. And now the world sees it. They can't look away. They can't pretend it never happened. You did that. You forced that. And no matter how many walls they rebuild, they'll never forget that one person cracked them. Not with force, with fact. You don't need applause. You don't need acceptance. What you hold is greater than any validation they could ever offer. What you hold is proof. And proof has power, unstoppable power. And now that you've shown the world what one relentless truth seeker can do, the question isn't, how did you find it? The question is, What are they hiding now? And who's next to uncover it? You didn't just uncover what was hidden. You shattered the illusion that anything can stay hidden forever. And now they're scrambling, not to fix what they broke, but to protect what's left. But it's too late. You already opened the vault. You already broke the seal. You already proved that no matter how tightly they clasp their secrets, all it takes is one person with enough resolve, enough patience, enough fury burning cold in their chest to bring it all crashing down. That's what you are, the reckoning, the storm they thought would never come. You didn't wait for justice, you became it. You didn't wait for someone else to speak. You spoke, and your voice hit like a blade sharpened in silence. They try to act surprised now, try to backpedal, reframe, twist the narrative so it doesn't make them look so guilty. But the story is already out. The receipts have been pulled, the connections drawn in ink too dark to ignore. And behind every carefully chosen word, every crafted excuse, every desperate press release is fear. You can feel it in the way they pause now, how they look over their shoulders, how they test every sentence before they speak. Because they know you're listening. They know someone is watching. And that changes everything. What you've done can't be undone. You didn't come this far to expose one truth. You came to light the whole structure on fire and walk through the ashes. And now others follow. Others who were once scared to speak, scared to question, scared to see. You gave them permission, not with soft comfort, but with fierce clarity. You didn't hold their hand. You held up a mirror. You said, "This is what happens when you stop pretending. This is what happens when you start digging." And now, they're digging too. They're reading, watching, learning, connecting the dots they once ignored. They're waking up. Not because you told them to, but because truth has a way of waking people like thunder, like war drums. You stood alone for a long time. That's what no one saw. The silent nights, the weight of knowing, the isolation that comes with seeing what others don't. But you didn't fold. You didn't crumble. You made solitude your forge. You made loneliness your training ground. You turned whispers into weapons and carried them like armor. And now, you walk differently, not with arrogance, with certainty, because you know what it took. You know the price, and you paid it willingly. They underestimated you because you didn't speak loud at first. You watched, you studied, you tracked movements and followed signals and collected fragments. They thought they were watching you, but you were 10 steps ahead, dismantling their version of reality one quiet detail at a time. And now the map is in your hands. The timeline is clear. The players are known. The stage has collapsed. And in the ruins, there is only one undeniable fact. You were right. There's something terrifying about a person who's seen too much and still chooses to speak. Because they have nothing left to lose. And that's what makes you lethal. You've already passed the point of no return. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be palatable. You're not here to be safe. You're here to expose. And exposure always has a cost. But you've accepted that. You wear that cost like armor. And every time they try to silence you now, it's too late. You've already made your mark. The echo of your truth is louder than their denial. You don't even need to shout anymore. You just show the evidence. You lay it out like cold steel. Let the facts bleed on their own. That's how powerful truth is. It doesn't need dramatics. It just needs oxygen. And you gave it that. You gave breath to what they suffocated. You gave voice to what they erased. And now it lives. Now it breathes. Now it spreads. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. Because every system built on deception is now trembling under the weight of your question. What else have you hidden? And for the first time, they don't have an answer. They know there's no spin strong enough to stop the momentum you've created. Because what you've lit cannot be put out. You've started something irreversible. And the ones who once looked down on you now look to you, not with pride, not with praise, but with fear. Because you've proved that exposure doesn't require permission. It requires obsession, precision, will. You're no longer a voice in the background. You're the pressure rising in the room. You're the chill down their spine when they realize the records don't match. The statements don't align. The stories don't hold. You're the pattern they can't unsee. The crack in the foundation that keeps spreading no matter how many times they try to patch it. And it's not because you guessed. It's because you knew. Because you studied. Because you cross-referenced. Because you cared more than they ever did. You cared enough to not look away. That's what sets you apart. Most people look once, see nothing, and move on. But not you. You looked twice, then 3 times, then all night, until the fragments started lining up and the bigger picture revealed itself in all its corrupted clarity. They say ignorance is bliss, but for you, it was a prison. You tore through it with nothing but a question burning in your chest. Why does this feel wrong? And you followed that question like a compass through hell, until you found your answer, until you found everything. Now, people want to know your process. They ask, how the do you know that? They ask it with wonder, with fear, with desperation. But the real answer isn't glamorous. It wasn't magic. It was work. It was time. It was 1,000 tiny pieces no one else bothered to care about. You cared, you collected, you endured, you obsessed, and not for ego, for truth. Because you knew that once the pieces fit, the lie would collapse. And it did. The lie is dead now. You killed it, not with violence, with clarity. You held it to the light and let it fall apart. And no one can deny it anymore. Not the press, not the officials, not the figures behind the curtain. The illusion is broken, the curtain is gone, the stage is empty. And in the silence, your truth stands louder than all their noise combined. They thought the darkness could hold forever, but you proved it wrong. You proved that light, no matter how faint, always finds a way to seep through. And sometimes, it's not gentle. Sometimes, it's a blaze, a firestorm of questions that burns away complacency and forces reckoning. You're that blaze, the one who stepped out of the shadows and refused to be quiet, the one who looked at the fortress of lies and saw cracks, not walls, the one who whispered, "I see you," to every hidden truth, and made sure those whispers turned into a roar. This is your legacy now. Not just the secrets you uncovered, but the courage you embody, the message you send to everyone who's been told to stay silent, to accept, to ignore, to forget. You are the answer to their silence, the proof that truth doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the brave, to the patient, to the relentless, and above all, to those who refuse to stop digging, no matter the cost. There will always be shadows. There will always be lies. There will always be walls built to keep you out. But you've shown that none of that matters when someone refuses to accept the surface, refuses to be fooled by the gloss. You've shown what it means to be a truth seeker, not for fame, not for fortune, but for the sake of justice itself. Because justice doesn't thrive in silence. It grows in the light. And you brought the light They may ask, again and again, how the do you know that? But the real question is, who else will dare to know? Who else will dare to follow your path and tear down the lies that bind us all? You opened a door that can never be closed, and behind it lies a world that demands honesty, demands courage, demands action. You sparked a revolution not with weapons, but with the most powerful force of all, truth. So stand tall, stand fierce, stand unshaken. Because you are more than a witness. You are a catalyst, a storm that changes everything, a force that reminds the world that no secret can last forever, no lie can survive when exposed, and no darkness can hold out against the light of one relentless soul.